And we probably figured out that the lobes correspond to the bones of the skull. So if you know where those are, this is not difficult. Okay, the frontal lobe is going to fill up the forehead. The parietal lobe is this kind of light purple or orchid one. The occipital lobe is the dark green in the back. And then on this model, the temporal lobe is the bright yellow.
Are you going to use the colored one for the
I can use whatever I want.
Okay. Just asking.
Yeah, I know. Not necessarily. Okay, but in reference to your question, the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if you want to put a bracket between around central sulcus through pre-central sulcus, those 5 will only be on the large colored brain, this one, because that's kind of hard to tell on the others. The next 5, from central sulcus through pre-central sulcus, will only be on this large colored brain, because it's just easier to see. Okay, so the first thing we need to find is that central sulcus. Well, on the colored brain, it's the depression between the red and the purple. See, it stands out real easy when they color them. Here's the central sulcus. Remember, a sulcus is a depression, and sure enough, it goes down the center of the brain. We're going across the center of the brain. That's the central sulcus. Okay, the next is the post-central gyrus. Post means behind, gyrus means raised area. So it's the raised area behind the central sulcus. So this is the post-central gyrus, the dark purple raised area. Post-central gyrus. Okay, then we have the post-central sulcus. Well, that's the depression, because the sulcus is a depression, behind the dark purple. Depression behind the dark purple. That's the post-central sulcus. Okay, so again, central sulcus is in the middle, post-central gyrus, post-central sulcus. Makes sense, it's in the back. Okay, now we're going to do the pre. We're going to go in front. Pre means before. So pre-central gyrus is the raised red area, and then the depression in front of that is the pre-central sulcus. So pre-central gyrus, pre-central sulcus, in front or in back. Okay? So once you know central, front or back is all you need to worry about. Okay, now, the rest of this is found on all models, so you're expected to know it every place. The next is called the superior temporal gyrus. Well, we're going to go to the temporal lobe. Superior means on top, gyrus means raised area. So this raised area on top of the lobe is the superior temporal gyrus. And then we got the opposite, the inferior temporal gyrus. That's the raised area on the bottom of the temporal lobe. Sometimes the words make sense.
Could you just say that again?
Sure. Superior temporal gyrus, top raised area. Inferior temporal gyrus, lower raised area. It's on the bottom. Okay, lateral cerebral fissure. Okay, that's the big depression that goes up and down or between the brain. Separates it into right and left halves. Longitudinal cerebral fissure. Okay, then we've got the lateral cerebral fissure. That's on top of the temporal lobe. It's on top of the temporal lobe. Okay, cross out the next one. It's not seen on the models. I don't know why they put it there. Parietal occipital fissure. Just forget that one. One less. Okay, so then let's look at the rest of the brain. Okay, if I ask you what the top 2 millimeters of this is, you're going to tell me cerebral cortex. Okay, top 2 millimeters is the cerebral cortex. If I ask you what the entire structure is, then you tell me cerebrum. Okay, that's how you tell the difference. Top 2 millimeters is cerebral cortex. The entire structure is the cerebrum. Okay, then hanging off the back, from this view, there's the cerebellum. Or if you look at it, it looks like this. Here's the cerebellum, okay, the bottom of the brain. Okay. Then, when you open these brains up, and be careful, because at least half of the brain comes apart, so we don't drop them on the floor. Because the plastic they're made of, they tend to chip and shatter. Okay, now, one thing, I don't know why they didn't color the inside. Well, we paid for these, you think they would do it. Can't imagine what these things cost. Hundreds of dollars. You say we're in the wrong business, people. All right, the next is the thalamus. The thalamus is this area here, and I'm going to skip ahead, because if you remember from the notes, this little circle or area inside the thalamus is the intermediate mass. So that's how I tell. The intermediate mass is this little circle, and the area around it is the thalamus. So this by itself is the intermediate mass. On this model, it's number 47. That helps. And then the area around it is the thalamus. Now, what number it's supposed to be, I don't know, because there's many numbers here. So intermediate mass, the little circle, the area around it is the thalamus. Okay, hypothalamus, we know hypo means below, so we're going to go down this way. You can see that the hypothalamus is slightly outlined with a groove. So this area under the thalamus, you see there's a groove there? Okay, that would be the hypothalamus. So again, intermediate mass, thalamus, under it is hypothalamus. Okay, the pons is this oval structure here. The hole shouldn't be there, that's the one of the little prongs to hold it together. This oval's the pons, and then the handle or the stem here, that's the medulla. Pons is the oval, and then here's the medulla. Okay, now I'm going to switch to the other side of this model. And when I pull the other side up, you're going to see that, this part comes out. And we need it to come out to see some structures. Okay, there you see a big space. That's the lateral ventricle. Remember, we have holes in our brain. Sure enough, the space is the lateral ventricle. And then if you look inside, to me it kind of looks like a ribbon. They should have colored it pink or red. They didn't. It's a white colored thing. Looks like a ribbon. That's the choroid plexus of the lateral ventricle. In other words, that's a specialized blood vessel. And if I ask this on the test, you must write out choroid plexus of the lateral ventricle. The whole thing. Okay, choroid plexus, this little ribbon-like structure on the inside. Okay. Okay, the third ventricle is the space around the thalamus. So you'd have to listen to my question. If I say name the space, you tell me third ventricle. If I say name the structure, you tell me thalamus. Okay? Because remember, ventricle is just a space. So the space is the third ventricle. The structure, again, is the thalamus. Okay, now, when you look on top of the thalamus, you see this, this area here. This area here, again, should be colored pink or red. It's not. This area right here is the choroid plexus of the third ventricle. So it's right on top of the thalamus, if that helps. It's the choroid plexus of the third ventricle. And then I'm going to jump ahead. At the end of the choroid plexus, there's this little kind of a roundish structure. That's the pineal gland. So choroid plexus of the third ventricle. Then you follow it down, looks like a little blob at the end. That's the pineal gland. That's the pineal gland. All right, then down here, here's the cerebellum, here's the medulla, there's a space. That's the fourth ventricle. That's the fourth ventricle. So here's your third ventricle, here's your fourth, and then we need a passageway to connect them, And what connects them is this passageway, the cerebral aqueduct. So third ventricle, cerebral aqueduct, fourth ventricle. Third ventricle, cerebral aqueduct is the passageway, and then the space is the fourth ventricle. All right, now I'm going to put the brain back together. I had a student once who loved to reassemble these brains. You know, I think of these like Rubik's Cubes, and believe me, I can't do those. So, okay, put the brain back together. Now we're going to look at the inferior or the bottom of the brain. Okay, so if I can stick everything. All right, the first thing is called the olfactory bulb. The olfactory bulb is where it says number 1. It's the tips here. There's 2 of them, one on each side. Now, olfactory is what sense?
Smell.
Smell. Okay, this is where we smell from, okay? Olfactory bulb, olfactory bulb. It's the tip. It has a Roman numeral 1 on it. Underneath there, you have an extension that goes down. That's the olfactory tract. So here's the olfactory bulb. This area underneath it, as soon as you get away from the number 1, that's the olfactory tract. Okay, now I'm going to skip around with the next 3. They're not in the right order. Okay, these little projections that stick up, they have a Roman numeral number 2 on them. Okay, that's the optic nerve. Those are the optic nerves. Those are going to sort of work with the eye. These are the optic nerves. Okay, now, where the optic nerves meet, and there's a split right here, where they meet, that's the optic chiasma. Remember, the optic chiasma is where the optic nerves crisscross behind the brain. So the little stuff sticking out are the optic nerves. The actual split where they meet in the center, I won't say it again, where they meet in the center, that's the optic chiasma. And then if you turn it a little bit, it should go either way, let's go this way. There's this area that goes down under the optic nerve, that's the optic tract. So optic nerve, the split is the chiasma, and then this area right here goes into the brain, that's the optic tract. Okay, so optic nerve, optic chiasma, optic tract. When you look at it up close, you'll see it. Okay, it's hard because they kept it white, I don't know how they did it. Okay, we saw the pineal gland already. Okay, this next model does not do a real good job of the infundibulum or the pituitary, but I'll show you anyway.
Bless you.
Okay, when we go to this part that comes out, this little blob looks like a little ball on the end. That stands for the pituitary. And this little tiny section that it attaches to, that's the infundibulum. This is not the best representation. So this little thing hanging off here is the pituitary gland, and where it attaches right above it is the infundibulum. Now, the next 2, cerebral peduncle and corpora quadrigemina. Okay, they're found in this, I'm going to use the other half of the brains, but this part is not falling apart. Okay, it's this area here. Number 67, I know that one, I memorized that one. Number 67, that stands for the cerebral peduncle. It's the area before the cerebral aqueduct. Remember, that's the passageway. So the area before the cerebral aqueduct, that's the cerebral peduncle. And then behind it, it looks like 2 little bumps. That's the corpora quadrigemina. It's behind the cerebral aqueduct. So cerebral peduncles in front, cerebral aqueducts in the middle, and then behind it is the corpora quadrigemina. And again, the way I remember is alphabetically, cerebral comes before corpora. Okay, corpus callosum, that's this big part here, it kinda looks like a comma with ridges. That's what it, connects the two hemispheres. We already mentioned the intermediate mass, that's that little number 47 there. And then the last one is the mammillary body. It's above the pons, and it's this little protrusion here. On this model, it's number 69. 69, that's the mammillary body. All right, now I said all the big brains look exactly identical, just a matter of what color's on them. To make sure you check them out. Okay, the second brain you need to be familiar with is this little one here. Okay, so I'm gonna go through the parts again rather quickly. Okay, again, we start with the lobes, same idea, frontals in here, parietals on the side, occipital's always on the back, and temporal is always under this big depression here. Okay, we're gonna skip the next 5 on here. We're gonna go to the superior temporal gyrus. Again, it's the raised area on the top part of the temporal lobe. The inferior temporal gyrus is the bottom raised area over here. Longitudinal cerebral fissure separates the brain into right and left sides. The big depression on top of the temporal lobe is the lateral cerebral fissure. Okay, top 2 millimeters, cerebral cortex. The entire structure is the cerebrum. Okay, here's part of the cerebellum. And then when I open this one up, some of these come apart several pieces. This one is kind of split like this. Okay, now this might be a little bit different on the inside. Okay, first we have the thalamus, which is the area here, and the little button in the middle, again, is the intermediate mass. So I find the little button, if that's the intermediate mass, the area around it has to be the thalamus. Okay, hypothalamus is this area below, more defined than on the other model. The pons looks like the oval, the medulla looks like the handle or the stem. Okay, now, on this particular model, I'm going to open this up, and sure enough, I find the hole. The big hole is the lateral ventricle, and then on this model, when you look inside, you're going to see pink. The pink stands for the choroid plexus of the lateral ventricle. So lateral ventricle is the space. The pink is the choroid plexus of the lateral ventricle. Okay, back to here. The space around the thalamus is the third ventricle, and when you look up close, you're going to see that they colored the top area pink. That's the choroid plexus of the third ventricle. And again, the little mass at the end, that's the pineal gland. So space is third ventricle, the pink is the choroid plexus of the third ventricle, and the little blob or mass at the end, that's always the pineal gland. Okay. Okay, this little area, this is not well done, but this little area right here, that would be the fourth ventricle. And again, the passageway that connects it is the cerebral aqueduct. So third ventricle, cerebral aqueduct, fourth ventricle. Okay. We go on the side then. Okay, we're looking at the bottom, the little bulb or tip. That's the olfactory bulb. What's under it is the olfactory tract. These little things that stick up, they have the romanodal chew on it. That's the optic nerve, where it splits in the middle. That's the chiasma, and where it goes into the brain, that's the optic tract. Okay, pineal gland we looked at. Okay, this one I thought I picked up a better brain. Does anybody's little brain have a little structure hanging off this white thing, they tend to break off. Anybody see one?
Can we get one of those frames over here?
Anybody have a little brain that has a little ball on the bottom? No? Okay, anyway, this is the infundibulum. I think I'll look for it, I thought it was here. This is the infundibulum, and these things fall off because they're not made well. But a little ball hangs off this white stem, which is the infundibulum, and that's the pituitary. I'll double check, maybe one of you has it. Okay, so infundibulum, and then that would be the pituitary. Okay, same idea from the inside. Okay, we find the cerebral aqueduct. What's right before it is the cerebral peduncle. The two little bumps are the corpora quadrigeminal. The corpus callosum looks like a big comma with ridges on it. Intermediate mass we already stated, and then the little round blob above the pons, that's the mammillary bone. Okay. All right, so what you're gonna do between now and 10:45, okay? Your exams with the actions, origins, and insertions are on the card. If you wanna take a look at it with the answer sheet, you can. On the side, I'll put the answer to your homework. If anything,